Chapter 1. My earliest memories. My earliest memories were of the family while communism was not yet felt in its fullest force. This wasn't to come on us until about 1930. We were living in Konsky Razdori near the Crimean Peninsula in the southern part of the Ukraine, and I well remember how we would get together in the beauty of the evening and sing. My family was blessed with beautiful singing voices, and especially my father. Papa had such a beautiful voice, and everyone loved to hear him sing. Once in a while we could get him to break into a little dance on that wooden leg of his, and we would just have the greatest time. We made our own entertainment in those days. No one in our little town had a radio, and television had not yet even been mentioned. When I was born, I had the two older sisters, Hannah and Maria, to help me along and keep me out of trouble. Two brothers, Gregory and Vasil, had been born and both died in infancy before I was born. On 10th May, 1925, Ekatarina was born. She was the last of the children to come to the Safronova family, and she later became the guitar player in the family, which added greatly to our singing. We had a little farm of about 10 acres and a few horses, cows, pigs, geese, ducks, turkeys, and chickens. We raised enough for ourselves and had enough to eat in those early days. Things were not so bad until the communists began to put pressure on the family to place the farm under the collectivization system around 1929 or 1930. Also, at this time, a deep economic depression was creeping over the nations, and as bad as it was in the United States, it was so much worse in other countries. Much grief and sorrow was now about to come upon the Safronova family and other Soviet citizens, as will be evident throughout this story. I guess the earliest thing I can remember of my life was when we almost had a tragic event involving me as the star victim. I was no more than 2.5 or 3 years old at the time. My mother had missed me and was frantically looking for me. When she found me, I was sitting at the edge of the farm waterhole with my feet dangling down inside, and I was leaning forward, admiring my reflection in the water about 4 feet below. How long I could have kept that up before pitching forward into water, much over my head, I don't know. But my mother wasn't taking any chances. She broke the world's speed record in getting to me, and in her understandable excitement, she grabbed me and tossed me about 6 feet behind her. No doubt I was now safe from falling into the waterhole, but I was a bit shook up from the toss. That was one waterhole that got covered in a hurry. Papa received swift direction from Mama to that effect, and her orders were carried out without further discussion. But it was not long until someone left the top off the waterhole, and I was missing again from the house. Mama was again frantic, and she just knew that I was in the water. Her screams brought the neighbors, who quickly prepared to drag the bottom for me. The excitement was interrupted by a neighbor lady who informed them that I was playing with her little girls at her house. My mother's near heart attack was all for naught. I don't remember any other waterhole incidents, but there was one similar event. We had a cherry tree that had produced well, and Mama had made some cherry wine and had strained it and had thrown the pulp and seeds out on the ground. Our turkeys and other fowls soon discovered the unusual food, and evidently the turkeys, being bigger, gobbled up most or all of it. Mama soon discovered what she thought was some dead turkeys in her backyard. Not realizing what they had been into, she certainly was not going to eat the dead turkeys, so she had Papa to get rid of them. He carried them all out to a big hole that was there because of a previously uprooted and fallen tree. He deposited them there until he could get around to burying them next day. Next morning, Mama looked out, and here came all those dead turkeys. They had sobered up and were hungry. Collectivization. All small farm owners had been told by the government that they could choose to keep their farms if they wanted to do so. But they were strongly invited to enter their farms into the collective system. They had waited long enough for the Safronova family to come to their senses and enter the system. So now they were beginning to put the squeeze on us. They began by levying heavy taxes on all the farmers. An exorbitant amount of what was produced had to go to the government. Communist demands continued to increase, finally requiring the government's share of production, even when there was no production. For example, if there were 365 days in a year, a chicken should produce 365 eggs per year, according to the communists. So, the government would levy a demand for a certain number of eggs as their share. And that amount must be turned over to the government, or one could end up paying the equivalent in money for the difference if there was not enough production. The communists could be very cruel in their inhuman methods of collection. I remember once when they came and took away our cow just as she was about to have her calf. We managed to get another calf and raised it until it was ready to have a calf, and the communists came and took that one too. It was one harassment after another, all designed to bring us to our knees and make us join the collective system. On one occasion, Papa took some homemade butter into town and sold it and bought soap and a few other articles with the money. After he returned home, he resold a bar of soap to a neighbor who, instead of being grateful for the soap, hoped to gain recognition from the communists by reporting him to the police. This resulted in his imprisonment for black marketing, and they confiscated all the other items he had purchased with the butter money. It is hard to say how long he might have remained in prison if my older sister had not been friends with a local communist official. This official obtained his release the very next day and the return of his goods, and of course the whole episode was soon forgotten. I remember another occasion when I was about 11 years old. We had picked a basket of plums from our 4 trees, and Papa was supposed to take these into town the next day and sell them. Well, you can guess what happened. Some blabbermouth had evidently blabbed to the communist officials, and their boys were right out to our house to collect plums for taxes that very night. That took care of Papa's trip into town next morning and all the beautiful skirts that Mama was going to make from the cloth that Papa was supposed to buy with the money from the plums. I remember this so vividly because I had been in the uppermost branches of one of the plum trees and forgot that I wasn't a monkey, and a limb broke under me and down I came right through limbs and foliage until I met the ground. Needless to say, I received my fair share of scratches and bruises. Deep depression. Once, in the early spring of 1934, with the country in a much deeper depression than the United States, and just coming out of a severe winter, we had nothing left to eat but a small bag of corn, and evidently, the communists thought it was about time for another visit to our house for tax collection and harassment purposes. My father had not yet yielded to their wishes concerning the farm. To do so, he would have to give up his horses and other animals, and the horses were his only source of transportation. Remember, my papa had only one leg, and a horse was a must, since there were no buses in my town in those days. My mother looked out the window one day, and I saw that frantic look on her face. She had spotted 2 communist agents approaching the house, and knowing what they would be after, she grabbed the bag of corn and quickly hid it under the bed covering. They entered the house and continued to search for anything acceptable until they found the bag of corn. Satisfied that we had nothing else, they took that and departed. Needless to say, the days following this event were bleak and hungry ones. They had already step by step drained off all the family assets through their taxation procedures. And now we had no more animals or poultry to sell and meet their taxation demands. Fear of starvation? The plan. My mother was desperate. The fear of starvation was very real. They could only obtain enough food to sustain not more than 2 or 3 people, even with severe rationing. So something had to be done immediately. The family settled on a plan. It wasn't a desirable plan, but it seemed to be the only thing left to do. Papa, with only one leg, Mama and Anna, who was too frail to travel, would stay home and scrounge for food. The other 3 little girls, me at age 10, Ekatarina at age 8, and Maria at age 13, but very small for her age, would go into the city of Palogi, approximately 25 miles distant, where we would scrounge for food in any way that we could find it. The idea was to keep alive. Our only method of travel was by train. We made a deal. We had no money and no tickets, so we made a deal with each other. Who else? We would resolve that problem by sneaking onto the train and hiding under the seats. Scared to death and hearts pounding, we carried out our plan. Not any too soon we were on our way. Although the trip was only 25 miles long, it seemed to take forever. If you have ever squeezed yourself under a seat on a train and had to keep totally quiet, for any length of time you will know that it was not a comfortable trip. Add to that the constant fear of being discovered by the conductor or by some loudmouth passenger. I will never understand why they couldn't hear our hearts pounding each time the conductor walked by. Train arrives in Palogi. As I look back upon the scene, how could they have kept from seeing us? Surely someone saw us and just ignored us. Or is it just possible that divine intervention by unseen guardian angels kept anyone from discovering 3 helpless little girls? Or maybe we just had a kind-hearted conductor that chose to look the other way when he passed by our hiding places. Perhaps we will know someday. Our train finally arrived in Palogi, where now we had to catch our chance and sneak off the train without being discovered. At that age, we didn't think to ask, what in the world would they do with 3 little penniless girls even if they did catch us? If they had discovered and detained us, they would have had to feed us, would they not? We never even thought of that. We just wanted to get off that train. Communists ignored the hungry. We recognized the train station and its immediate surroundings, as we had been there a few times before with our father. So we stayed close to the station and didn't venture out too far for the first few days. We competed with many others for what little food that could be found in nearby garbage cans. There were numerous hungry people in those days, and there were no soup lines like there were in the United States. The communists either didn't know how or didn't care about feeding the hungry. We witnessed horrid scenes of people dying in the streets and on the sidewalks, some being eaten alive with maggots swarming over their weak bodies. This was a traumatic sight for children as young as we were. Many people traveled or wandered from place to place, looking for food for themselves and their families. They all carried their little bags which might contain scraps of food for the next family meal. Bear in mind that there was not much food of any kind that could be thrown out even by those who had enough for their families. So it took time and patience to gather a few scraps and have enough in those little sacks to feed one's family. In reality, all family members that were old enough were out gathering scraps of food and bringing them home where all was combined into a meal for the whole family. Unless, of course, the person was so hungry that they ate what was found right, then and there. And I'm afraid it was more often eaten then and there. Sad circumstances, but humorous events. Even in sad circumstances and bleak surroundings, one will witness humorous events. One such event happened while we were in the train station. It was nothing new to see someone snatch someone else's bag and run with it, much like seagulls and pelicans snatching each other's fish and flying off with it. But on this particular occasion, we watched a would-be thief sneak up on an unattended bag, only to grab hold of an immovable object. It looked like all the other bags, but unlike other bags, this one contained a bag of salt, weighing maybe 50 pounds. When one is a hungry thief, that is a lot of weight. It wasn't funny to him, but our hunger was temporarily overcome by gleeful laughter. The embarrassed would-be thief sneaked away as quickly and quietly as he could, and we never saw him again. But I'll bet he approached the next bag with extra caution. Would go to bed hungry. Communists had plenty. There were days when we found nothing to eat and had to go to bed hungry. Our bed was wherever we could find some dry grass and weed sheltered from the cold wind, usually up close to a building and hidden from view of people. Being just little girls, we were naturally afraid of people, although no one ever bothered us. Others were just too preoccupied with their own lives to even notice us. Their lives were difficult too. As I mentioned before, times were really bad. There was a worldwide depression, and the communists had killed off the big farmers and landowners who knew how to produce food in large quantities. Lack of experience was evident everywhere, and so the people suffered terribly. I am sure that the card-carrying communists had plenty of food, but there wasn't much left for the masses. People in the cities had to depend on food coming in from the farms, and there seemed to be nothing but chaos in the collective farm system. They were lucky to grow anything, and the rest of the Soviet Union depended on the Ukraine to produce the food, as it was the breadbasket for the entire Soviet Union. Time to return home. It was getting near to the end of April, and we had been in the city trying to survive for the past month or so, and it wasn't getting any easier. The baby sister, Ekatarina, had gotten sick, and we decided we had better return home, at least for her sake. The train was still our only method of transportation, and we hadn't gotten any braver, but we all understood what we had to do. So, we again sneaked onto the train and hid out for the return trip home. Sure enough, just as we expected, our courage hadn't improved one bit. We were just as scared as we had been when we rode into the city a month or so before. There wasn't much to see from our hiding place on the train, but I still remember peeking out and watching a passenger eating his lunch, which consisted of nothing but one big onion. He ate it as if it were an apple, and our mouths watered as we watched him. When one is hungry, especially when one is a little girl, most anything looks good, and that onion was beginning to look pretty good. We finally arrived at our station, and we deboarded without discovery, or at least so we thought. The more I think about it, the more I wonder how it was possible for 3 little girls to sneak onto a train and hide under the seats completely undetected. Our Father in heaven was surely watching over us. Now we were filled with great anticipation as we neared home. It seemed like we had been gone forever, and we wondered how things would be at home. Back home again, tears of joy. When we arrived home, there were tears of joy. Mama hadn't heard from us for perhaps a month and a half, And now that I have children and grandchildren of my own, I can well understand the anguish and pain she and Papa felt, not knowing if we had even survived at all. The fear for our survival must have been great. But if I know my mother, there were prayers for us day and night. Religion not allowed. Religion couldn't be discussed with the children, but I know that my mother prayed often. I didn't understand what prayer was at that time, but I do now. You must realize that religion was banned under communism. Parents had to be very careful about teaching their children anything about religion. This was a very serious offense. Well, we were finally home, safe and sound, except little Katya, whose face was red and swollen, most likely from malnutrition. Eating raw fish heads and other near-edible objects from dirty garbage cans was certainly no balanced diet for that time of year. And God only knows how and why we weren't all sick from food poisoning. But now we were all home, and things were beginning to grow out of the ground, such as mushrooms, grass, and possibly some edible wild greens. I know that we had messes of nothing but plain cooked grass. Mother figured that if the cows ate it, maybe we could too. And she was right. Mushrooms were very dangerous if you didn't know which ones were edible. I got sick from them, but a young 16-year-old neighbor and his 18-year-old sister both died from eating poison mushrooms. Hunger and starvation were to remain with us for many years to come. I cannot remember a time when we had enough to eat, but our mother used what little food we had in a very wise manner. We children wanted to eat it all in one big meal, but Mother would ration it out a little at a time so that we could have something for the next meal. We could have died from malnutrition if it had not been for her conservation of our food supply. She even took corn stalks and corn cobs and beat them into flour for bread. Many things can be eaten when it is a plain case of survival or death. I can understand now why Papa was so depressed and frustrated at times, and why he turned to the vodka bottle for relief. It is ironic, but vodka always seemed to be available even when food was not. Papa was fairly young too at that time, and I am sure that he didn't completely understand that the vodka just made matters worse. However, phantom pains caused by the missing leg were sometimes unbearable, and perhaps the vodka was his only source of relief for that pain. At any rate, we loved our Papa, and he was completely forgiven as far as we were concerned.